The church bells began to ring long before Lydia Harrow reached the front doors, but the sound didn't bring the comfort it was meant to. It echoed through the small western town of Red Hollow like a warning, hollow and trembling, reminding her that every stride she took down the aisle would carry her closer to a future she had never chosen. Her wedding dress, a gown of heavy ivory satin trimmed with imported lace, felt more like a shroud than something meant for joy. It clung to her skin, too tight at the waist, too stiff around her ribs. Lydia's mother had chosen the dress, declaring that a woman must look obedient and elegant on her wedding day. Her father had chosen the man she was to marry, insisting that security was more important than affection. But none of them had to live with the truth Lydia had discovered. Her fiancé, Samuel Price, had charmed her family with polished manners and wealth earned from mining investments. Yet beneath his gentlemanly veneer was a temper sharp enough to cut. Lydia had seen glimpses of it, hands that tightened around her wrist, eyes that hardened like stone when she questioned his decisions. But the night before the wedding, she overheard something chilling. She had slipped out of her room to fetch water and paused at the top of the staircase when she heard Samuel's voice, low, cold, and unmistakably threatening. "If she ever embarrasses me," he said to his friend, "I'll make sure she learns what obedience means. A bride is a possession, and possessions don't talk back." The words had rooted Lydia to the stairs, her breath gone, her blood running ice-cold. For the rest of the night she sat awake, the moonlight shifting across her quilt as her world collapsed. By dawn, she knew she could not go through with the wedding. She just didn't know how to escape that now. Standing at the church threshold, her hands trembling inside her gloves, Lydia could feel Samuel's gaze on her back even before she turned. There was a weight to it, watchful, controlling, possessive. Her heart beat faster, her chest tightening until she feared she would burst. The minister stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Are you ready, my dear?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her mother nudged her, whispering sharply, "Lydia, behave." Then Samuel approached, offering his arm with forced charm. "Shall we begin?" She saw it then, the flicker of impatience in his eyes, the subtle flare of anger beneath the polished smile. And something inside Lydia snapped. A primal, instinctive warning rose within her. Run. Before anyone could stop her, Lydia stepped backward, turned, and bolted down the steps of the church. Gasps broke out behind her. Someone shouted her name. Her father yelled for her to come back. But Lydia didn't dare look over her shoulder. The desert stretched before her, vast, unforgiving, yet somehow more merciful than the life she was fleeing. Her satin skirts tangled around her ankles, her lace veil tore on a mesquite branch, and the sun beat down on her pale shoulders. She could hear footsteps pounding behind her, men's voices rising in anger and disbelief. "Grab her!" Someone shouted. "Don't let her get away!" Lydia's lungs burned, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The land blurred around her, the dusty ground, the scrub bushes, the shimmering horizon. She didn't know where she was going. She simply knew she had to keep moving, had to put as much distance as possible between herself and Samuel Price. Her shoes slipped on loose gravel. She stumbled, caught herself, kept running. Her wedding gown weighed her down like chains. The wind tore at her hair, sending golden strands fluttering across her face. Behind her, the hoofbeats began. Samuel had mounted a horse. Her heart lurched painfully. She pushed herself harder, tears streaking down her cheeks. The sound of the hooves grew louder, closer, relentless. She glanced back and saw dust kicking up behind him, his silhouette dark and furious against the morning sun. "Lydia!" Samuel roared. "You come back here!" She fled blindly toward a cluster of rocks, praying for a miracle, praying for anything. Just before her strength gave out, she caught sight of movement on a distant ridge. A rider. Tall, steady, watching. She didn't know who he was. She only knew that he wasn't Samuel, and in that moment, hope flickered inside her for the first time all morning. High above the desert floor, where the wind moved freely and silence stretched over miles, Talon sat astride his mare summer fire. From that high ridge, he saw everything: the town, the long road that split the desert like a scar, the distant church with its ringing bells. But he rarely concerned himself with the affairs of settlers. Their world and his ran parallel, brushing edges but never truly touching. Yet this morning, something was different. A flicker of white, unnatural, too bright for desert stone, caught his eye. Talon narrowed his gaze. The white shape moved fast, stumbling, rising, and running again. A woman in a wedding dress. Talon's jaw tightened. No one ran in a wedding gown unless something was terribly wrong. He guided his mare closer to the ridge's edge, observing with the keen eyes his people praised him for. Below, he saw the woman tripping over the rocks, her breath visible even from the distance in the frantic rise and fall of her shoulders. Her hair streamed behind her like a pale banner, catching on every passing gust of wind. Then he saw the dust, a trail of it, fast-moving, aggressive, a horseman giving chase. Talon's hands tightened on the reins. Among his people, women of all tribes and all races were to be protected, honored. A woman fleeing for her life was a sight that stirred his instinct before his mind demanded details. The pursuer came into view as he descended the slope, a man in a dark suit, far too fine for riding. The groom, Talon guessed. His posture was rigid with fury, the kind that made men reckless and cruel. The woman stumbled again, hands slapping the dusty ground to break her fall. Talon felt a surge of urgency. In the desert, a person could be hunted as easily as a deer, and he could not, in good conscience, watch this play out like a silent spectator. Still, he needed to be sure. He nudged Summerfire forward. The mare obeyed instantly, her hooves steady on the rocky terrain. As Talon descended, he watched the woman look back over her shoulder, pure terror carving her face, eyes wide and glistening. She scrambled to her feet, but her body was faltering. She would not make it far. Talon clicked his tongue and the mare broke into a swift descent. He cut across the lower ridge, approaching from an angle neither she nor the pursuer expected. The closer he got, the more he saw details he wished he hadn't. The bruises on her wrist, the torn lace dragging behind her, the raw desperation in her movements. She wasn't running from cold feet. She was running from danger. He arrived at the dry riverbed seconds before she did. Lydia stumbled into the shallow basin, her breath failing her. When she rounded a boulder and nearly collided with him, she froze. Her eyes widened at the sight of the towering figure on horseback, dark braids, sun-browned skin, quiet strength in his posture. Talon raised one hand calmly, palm outward. "You are safe," he said in measured English. "I will not harm you." For a heartbeat, she stared up at him, chest shaking. Then her gaze flicked behind her. The hoofbeats grew louder. Talon saw her decision before she made it. She took a shaky step behind his horse, seeking shelter from a man she had never met. It told him everything he needed to know. Samuel Price thundered into the riverbed moments later, yanking his horse to a stop. His face, red with anger and exertion, twisted when he saw the Apache warrior blocking his path. "Move aside," Samuel barked. "That woman is my bride." Talon didn't move. His voice came low, steady, carrying the weight of someone who had faced threats far greater than one furious groom. "She does not wish to go with you. She belongs to me." Samuel snapped. Talon's eyes hardened. "A woman is not a possession." Behind him, the bride trembled, clinging to the back of Talon's saddle for balance. Samuel's expression flickered, fear mixed with frustration. He hadn't expected resistance. Certainly not from an Apache warrior with the calm intensity of a man who did not bluff. "You have no right," Samuel hissed. Talon looked down at him with a gaze that could cut rock. "I have the right to protect someone in danger." Samuel shifted in his saddle, sensing the shift of power. Talon was not just a man of the land, he was someone danger bowed to. Seeing he wouldn't win, Samuel spat into the dust. "This isn't over." He yanked his horse around and galloped off, fury trailing behind him like smoke. The moment he disappeared, Lydia's legs gave out. She collapsed against the rock wall, sobbing from relief and exhaustion. Talon dismounted in one fluid motion and crouched beside her. His voice gentled. "You are safe with me. No one will harm you now." For a long moment after Samuel's departure, the desert fell silent except for the ragged sound of Lydia's breathing. She pressed her trembling palms against the cool rock wall of the riverbed, fighting to steady herself. Her vision blurred, her legs weak from fear and the frantic flight that had nearly cost her life. Talon watched her carefully, not with pity, but with the patient calm of a man who understood trauma far more intimately than he ever wished to. The wind stirred his dark braids as he crouched beside her, giving her space yet staying close enough that she felt anchored. Lydia tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Thank you. If you didn't, you were in danger," Talon said softly. "I could not stand aside." Those simple words struck deeper than any vow she'd heard inside a church. He hadn't known her name, her story, or her past. He had moved for one reason alone, because he saw a person in need. Slowly, with hands still shaking, Lydia pushed herself up onto her elbows. Dust streaked her once pristine dress. A tear in the lace sleeve exposed the bruise on her wrist, the one Samuel's fingers had left days earlier when she'd hesitated to answer one of his questions. Talon's eyes flicked to the mark. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Lydia followed his gaze and immediately tugged the torn sleeve down in shame. "It's nothing," she whispered. "It is not nothing," Talon replied, his voice deep and steady. A bruise speaks even when a person cannot. Her breath caught in her throat. No one, not her mother, not the minister, not even her own father, had ever looked at her injuries and seen the truth. They called Samuel passionate or high-spirited, as though cruelty were a sign of good breeding. Talon stood and extended his hand. "Come, you cannot stay here." She stared at his hand for several seconds. Strong, steady, open. Part of her wanted to crawl into a ball and hide forever, but another part, something fragile yet stubborn, reached for him. Her fingers slipped into his palm, and Talon pulled her to her feet with careful strength. Lydia wobbled, her legs weak, but he braced her with a touch so gentle she nearly wept again. Where are you taking me?" she asked. "To safety," he replied. "There is a place nearby where the canyon walls will shelter you. Water, shade, a place to rest." Lydia swallowed. "You don't even know me." "I do not need to know your name to see fear," he said. "And I do not need to know your past to know that you are not safe alone." Her eyes softened. Her heart tugged by a warmth she hadn't felt in a very long time, perhaps ever. With surprising ease, Talon lifted her onto Summer Fire, his mare. Lydia gasped as she settled in the saddle. The horse shifted beneath her, warm and strong. "But what about you?" she asked, glancing down. Talon placed one hand on the mare's neck, murmuring something in Apache that soothed her instantly. Then he stepped beside Lydia, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I will walk beside you," he said simply. That was his way, no grand proclamations. No need to impress, just quiet certainty. She found herself trusting that certainty more than she had ever trusted her own judgment. They moved through the canyon slowly, the sound of Summer Fire's hooves echoing softly. Lydia clung to the saddle horn at first, but eventually her grip loosened as she felt Samuel's presence fade behind her like a nightmare dissolving in daylight. Talon walked in silence, scanning the desert with a protector's vigilance. Every few minutes he glanced up to check on her. Each time, Lydia felt a faint warmth rise in her chest, as if each look gently reminded her she wasn't alone. "May I ask your name?" she finally said. "Talon," he answered. "I'm Lydia." He nodded, as though committing the name to memory with reverence. She hesitated, then whispered, "What you said back there. That I was safe with you. Did you mean it?" Talon stopped walking and looked up at her fully. The intensity of his gaze rooted her in place. Not harsh, not frightening, just sincere, steady, unbreakable. "I do not say what I do not mean," he said. "You are safe with me, Lydia. No harm will touch you while I draw breath." The promise sank into her bones, warming places inside her that had long grown cold. For the first time since dawn, Lydia let out a breath that wasn't shaped by fear. The canyon opened like a secret world as Talon guided Lydia deeper into its sheltered paths. Sunlight filtered through the jagged cliffs, casting golden stripes across the ground, and the sound of a distant waterfall whispered a promise of life amid the desert's harshness. For Lydia, it was unlike anything she had ever known, a hidden refuge, untouched by prying eyes, where danger seemed unable to follow. Talon led her to a small cave tucked behind a curtain of cascading water. The cool mist kissed her overheated skin, washing away the grit and dust clinging to her dress. She stepped inside, the sound of her own breath mingling with the murmur of flowing water. And suddenly the weight of the morning's terror settled fully on her shoulders. She slumped against the smooth stone, tears threatening once more. Talon didn't speak immediately. Instead, he moved with quiet efficiency, setting aside a bundle of woven blankets and guiding a stream of clear water into a shallow basin. He worked in silence, but every movement spoke of care. He did not rush, did not judge, and did not demand explanations. It was as though the cave itself had taught him patience, and he carried that patience like armor. "You should drink," he said finally, his voice calm and even. "And rest if you can." Lydia obeyed, cupping the water in her hands and letting it wash over her lips. The cool liquid spread relief through her parched throat and chapped lips. She glanced at him, her mind still spinning from the morning's chaos. "Why? Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. Talon's gaze remained steady. "Because you are in danger, and no one should face such danger alone," he said simply. "I will not let harm come to you if I can prevent it." She studied him in the flickering light, noting the strength in his frame and the quiet intensity of his dark eyes. He was unlike any man she had ever known. There was no pretense, no false charm. His presence commanded attention without demanding it, and she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months or perhaps ever: safety. "Sit," Talon instructed, pointing to a flat stone near the water's edge. "You need to rest your legs." She obeyed, allowing her weight to sink into the warm stone. As she settled, she noticed small, subtle details in the cave: a carved indentation where someone had knelt, smooth river stones arranged with care, remnants of dried herbs tied in a small bundle. It was clear that this place was not only a refuge but a home, a sanctuary built with intention. "You've been running far," Talon said, not as a question but as a statement. "Your body needs fuel and water. Your mind needs quiet." Lydia nodded. She wanted to speak, to tell him everything about Samuel, about her fear, about the life she was fleeing, but the words refused to come all at once. Instead, she took a deep breath, feeling the mist of the waterfall cool her face, and allowed herself to simply be present, to simply exist in this moment of unexpected sanctuary. Talon knelt beside her. his hand resting on his thigh but close enough that she felt the steady warmth radiating from him. "Tell me," he said quietly, "only when you are ready." She hesitated, looking down at her hands. Her wedding dress was torn and stained with dust, and the bruises on her wrists had darkened in the sun. Yet in his presence she felt a strange courage. Slowly she began to recount her story, the days leading up to the wedding, Samuel's threats, the moment she realized she could not go through with it. Her voice shook at first, then grew steadier as she spoke, releasing the weight she had carried alone for so long. Talon listened without interruption. No judgment passed his face, no impatience in his movements. His attention was absolute, focused entirely on her words, as though by hearing them he could absorb some of her burden. When she finished, she fell silent, tears streaking her dusty cheeks. "You are brave," Talon said after a moment. "Not for running, no, that was wise, but for surviving what you faced alone. Few could do what you have done today." For the first time, Lydia felt the truth of his words sink into her. She had run, yes, but she had survived, and now, perhaps for the first time, she was allowed to rest without fear. She looked up at Talon and saw only sincerity in his eyes, no condescension, no expectation. Only protection. The cave, the waterfall, and Talon's steady presence formed a fragile cocoon around her, shielding her from the dangers of the world outside. For the first time that morning, Lydia felt her racing heart slow. She did not know what the future held, but for now, she was safe, and in a way she could not yet fully name, she felt a spark of hope. The days that followed in the hidden canyon were quiet but transformative. Lydia's wounds, both visible and hidden, began to heal in the soft sanctuary Talon had offered. The sound of the waterfall became a constant comfort, and the cool shade of the canyon walls gave her a sense of safety she had never known in her sheltered, controlled life. But it was not the water or the stone that eased her spirit, it was Talon himself at first. She had watched him cautiously, unsure of whether to trust him completely. He had saved her life, yes, but the world had taught her to fear the intentions of men. Yet every action of Talon's, every careful gesture, every protective glance spoke of a gentleness that could not be feigned. He did not speak in the lofty tones of her father's acquaintances or the hollow flattery of Samuel Price. He spoke simply, with clarity, with purpose. Talon taught her to observe the land around them. "The desert speaks," he said one morning as he led her along a narrow trail above the canyon. "You only need to listen." At first, Lydia thought him poetic, almost mystical, until she noticed the subtle signs he pointed out, the shape of clouds predicting rain, the tracks of animals showing the approach of danger, the rustle of bushes hinting at nearby creatures. Each lesson was practical, empowering, and it made her feel competent in a way she never had before. In turn, Lydia shared her own knowledge with him. She showed him letters she had written but never sent, small poems she had hidden in the folds of her dress, even rudimentary drawings she had made of the landscape. He watched her teach him, absorbing her words with an intensity that made her heart lift in quiet astonishment. For the first time in her life, she felt seen not as an ornament, not as a possession, but as a person with thoughts, dreams, and fears. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the canyon in shades of gold and crimson, Lydia struggled to light a fire. The small sticks she had gathered refused to catch, and frustration welled within her. Talon knelt beside her, showing her how to arrange the kindling, how to strike the stones at just the right angle. When the flame finally sprang to life, she felt a surge of triumph. He nodded approvingly, and for the first time, Lydia noticed a warmth in his gaze that went beyond mere mentorship or protection. "You have patience," she said. Her voice soft, almost shy. Talon's lips quirked slightly. A subtle smile. "Patience is necessary when life matters," he replied, "and when a person matters." Lydia felt her breath hitch. She looked away, feeling her cheeks burn. That simple acknowledgement, that recognition that she mattered, was unlike anything she had experienced in the rigid, controlling world of her family. With Talon, her thoughts and feelings were valid. Her fears were acknowledged. Her triumphs were celebrated. Over the following days, their bond deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, the way Talon's brow furrowed when he was deep in thought, the quiet way he noticed small details in the canyon, the gentle strength of his hands. Lydia learned his, too, the protective way he moved, the silent care in every gesture, the patience that allowed her to find her own courage. Their interactions were filled with small intimacies, the brush of hands as he helped her steady herself on uneven terrain, the shared laughter when a stubborn mule refused to obey, the quiet comfort of sitting together by the waterfall as the sun dipped below the cliffs one evening. As twilight settled over the canyon, Lydia allowed herself to speak a truth she had kept hidden for too long. "I've never felt safe," she admitted. "Not in my own home. Not with the people who were supposed to protect me." Talon's gaze softened. "You are safe now," he said quietly, not as a promise made lightly, but as a certainty grounded in action. "And I will not let that change." Lydia looked at him, her chest tightening in a strange, unfamiliar way. The fear she had carried for years began to dissolve, replaced by something warmer, something she couldn't yet name. Here, in this hidden canyon, surrounded by rock and water, she discovered a truth she had not anticipated, that trust could grow, even in the desert, even after betrayal. And with trust came a spark of hope that life could be different, that it could be full of care, respect, and perhaps love. As the night settled over the canyon, Lydia lay beneath a blanket Talon had woven, listening to the murmur of the waterfall and the steady rhythm of his breathing. She had once believed the world was a place of danger and cruelty. Now she believed, however tentatively, that there was a place for her in it, one where she did not have to run, one where she could be seen, and one where she was truly safe. The canyon had become a world unto itself, a sanctuary where Lydia felt the first fragile threads of trust and comfort. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of life there, rising with the sun, learning from Talon, sharing small tasks and quiet laughter. But the serenity of the hidden refuge could not erase the memory of the man she had fled. Samuel Price would not forget, and he would not forgive. It began with the distant sound of hooves echoing against the canyon walls, faint at first, almost like a warning carried by the wind. Talon's eyes narrowed, scanning the ridgeline. Even before Lydia sensed it, he knew. Danger had come back. "He's here," he said simply, his voice low but firm. "Samuel Price has found us." Lydia's chest tightened. Fear surged like a tide, threatening to sweep away the courage she had built over days of careful recovery. How did he find us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Talon didn't answer immediately. His eyes were sharp, calculating, moving over every rock and bush, every shadow the canyon offered. "He will not leave without you," he said at last. "That is how men like him behave. But he will not take you from here if I stand in his way." She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. For the first time since fleeing the church, she realized the danger she had escaped wasn't over, it had only been delayed. And this time, it was closer than ever. "We need a plan," Talon continued. "You will not hide. You will not run. We face him together, but you must stay beside me, do exactly as I say." The words sent a shiver down Lydia's spine, but beneath the fear there was a flicker of resolve. She had learned over the days with Talon that running was no longer the only option. He had taught her to trust her instincts, to act with intention, and to stand firm when necessary. As the search party approached, Talon led Lydia to a higher ledge overlooking the canyon floor. The horses' hooves pounded in the distance, growing louder, and the silhouettes of Samuel and his men became visible. Talon moved with deliberate precision, positioning Lydia behind him but not hiding her entirely. He wanted her to see, to understand, and to be part of the confrontation. Not a helpless witness. Samuel emerged from the dust cloud of the desert floor, his expression twisted with fury. "Lydia!" he shouted. "Come back. You belong to me." Lydia's heart raced, but she did not step back. She had practiced this moment silently with Talon over long walks through the canyon. Steady breathing, clear eyes, a voice that carried without fear. She felt his presence beside her, solid and unwavering, and it gave her courage. "I do not belong to you," she called, her voice trembling at first but gaining strength with each word. "I never did." Samuel faltered for a moment, disbelief flashing across his face. The men around him shifted uneasily. They had been prepared for compliance, for a terrified bride to be brought back under threat or force. This was not the response they had expected. Talon's eyes locked onto Samuel's. His stance was unyielding, a wall of resolve and protection. "She is free to choose her own life," he said, his voice carrying authority and warning. "You will not harm her." Samuel's jaw tightened, and he spat into the dust. "You have no right," he screamed. "This is my wife." "No," Talon replied. "She is not your possession. She never was." The tension cracked like a live wire between them. Samuel's men hesitated, uncertain, and in that pause, Talon's presence radiated a quiet dominance that spoke louder than weapons. With a single commanding gesture, he moved so that any aggressive advance would be met with resistance. His calm strength intimidating those who had come to intimidate. Samuel glared, his fury giving way to frustration. He realized then that this confrontation was not just about possession, it was about courage, loyalty, and honor, qualities he had no claim to. Swearing under his breath, he kicked his horse around, retreating down the canyon, his men following reluctantly. Lydia exhaled shakily, her knees weak from adrenaline and relief. Talon turned to her, his expression softening just enough to ease the tension that still lingered in her chest. "You are safe," he said, almost a whisper now. "No one will harm you while I am here." For the first time since dawn days ago, she truly believed it. She had faced the threat, and she had not been alone. She had a protector, not just a stranger, but someone she trusted, someone who had proven that his words meant action. And in that proof, she felt the quiet stirring of something more than relief, something that would grow into hope, and eventually into a bond neither danger nor desert could sever. The sun had barely risen, and the canyon was bathed in a soft golden light, the kind that made the desert rocks glow as though lit from within. Talon and Lydia stood on a high ledge, overlooking a narrow passage where Samuel Price and his men had assembled. The search party, a motley group of townsmen and hired guns, had tracked her to the canyon with relentless persistence. Samuel's face, twisted with anger and entitlement, glared upward at them like a predator that had been denied its prey. Lydia's stomach churned, but she stood close to Talon, feeling the solidity of his presence anchor her. Her legs were still weak from days of hiding and running, but the lessons Talon had taught her, the careful observation of the land, reading the terrain, staying steady, gave her a sense of preparedness she had never known. She had learned to rely not only on his strength but on her own. Samuel raised his hand, pointing at her. "Come down, Lydia," he demanded. "You have no choice. You are my wife." Lydia's gaze met his, and for the first time she felt the courage to speak with a voice that was her own. "I am not your wife," she called, her voice carrying across the canyon. "I have never been your wife, and I never will be. I belong to no one but myself." A murmur ran through the search party. Some men exchanged uneasy glances. They had been trained to follow orders and assume obedience, but her defiance unnerved them. She saw hesitation flicker in Samuel's eyes, his anger clashing with the realization that he had lost control. Talon stepped forward, placing himself between Lydia and the men below. His posture radiated calm, unshakable authority. "She chooses her own path," he said firmly. "You will not touch her. You will not threaten her. Leave this place now." Samuel's fury roared like a storm. "You can't stop me. This woman is mine by law and by right." "She is no one's possession," Talon replied, his voice unwavering. "If you wish to claim anything, it will not be her. It will be my patience, and you will find it has limits." Talon's presence was more than physical. It was a statement. His eyes, dark and unwavering, told Samuel that he would not back down, that any attempt to force Lydia would be met with skill, precision, and unwavering determination. Samuel's men glanced at one another, suddenly uncertain. This was not a confrontation they could control with numbers or intimidation. Then Samuel moved as if to advance. Talon shifted, positioning himself directly in the narrow path between Lydia and the approaching man, his hands ready, his stance unyielding. Every subtle movement radiated experience and authority. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Lydia felt a surge of something unfamiliar but powerful pride, courage, and certainty. She had spoken her truth. She had stood her ground. And now she was not alone. She had someone who believed in her, who protected her not because he was forced to, but because he chose to. Samuel hesitated. His anger had been a weapon, but it now wavered in the face of a calm he could not conquer. Talon's eyes met his with unspoken warning. "Continue, and you will fail." Finally, with a growl of frustration, Samuel spun his horse around, kicking up dust as he retreated. The men behind him followed reluctantly, some casting backward glances at Lydia, unsure whether they had witnessed bravery or madness. Lydia's knees shook as the adrenaline faded, but she remained standing. Talon stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You are safe," he said, the words steady and certain. "No one will harm you now." She looked up at him, feeling a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something deeper she could not yet name. The threat had been real, immediate, and terrifying. But she had faced it. She had spoken her truth. And with Talon by her side, she had survived not just physically, but with her dignity and spirit intact. For the first time since the nightmare began, Lydia allowed herself to breathe fully, to feel the warmth of safety and the quiet thrill of freedom. She had run, she had hidden, and she had feared. But now, standing on that ledge, with the canyon and the desert stretching wide around her, she understood that she was no longer a victim. She was a person with a voice, a choice, and a protector who valued her as she deserved to be valued. Talon glanced at her, his expression softening. "The danger has passed for now, but we must remain vigilant." Lydia nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Then we remain together." He nodded once, approvingly, and in that moment, the bond between them deepened not through words alone, but through the shared ordeal, trust, and unspoken understanding that had grown over the days in the canyon. The sun sank low behind the canyon walls, casting long shadows that stretched across the rocky terrain like soft reminders of the day's trials. Lydia sat on a flat stone near the waterfall, her hair still damp from the mist, her once pristine dress now tattered and stained with dust and sweat. She looked out at the canyon, the golden light warming the cliffs, and felt a quiet awe at the wild, untamed beauty that had become her refuge. But even more than the landscape, she was aware of the figure beside her, Talon, whose presence had become as essential as the air she breathed. After the confrontation with Samuel Price and the retreat of his men, the canyon had returned to its peaceful rhythm. The waterfall's gentle roar, the wind whispering through the crevices, and the occasional cry of a desert bird formed a melody that made her heart, for the first time in months, feel steady. She could finally allow herself to imagine life not as a series of threats, but as a space where she could breathe, think, and live on her own terms. Talon knelt near the edge of the water, preparing a simple meal of dried fruits, roasted roots, and fresh water drawn from the stream. He worked methodically, the kind of quiet, deliberate skill that made every motion seem purposeful. Lydia watched him, feeling a sense of safety and calm she had never known in her former life. In his presence, she felt protected not only from danger, but from the constant weight of expectation and fear that had shadowed her for years. "You have shown courage," Talon said softly, glancing at her. "Most would have been paralyzed by what you faced today." Lydia felt a shiver run through her, not from fear but from recognition. "I had someone to protect me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wouldn't have managed alone." "You managed because you survived," Talon replied, his eyes meeting hers. "But I would have been remiss if I had stood by." A comfortable silence followed, filled only by the sound of the waterfall and the rustle of leaves stirred by the evening wind. Lydia felt herself relaxing in ways she hadn't realized were possible. She had run, fled, and hidden for so long that stillness had become foreign, but now it felt like a gift. Slowly, she leaned slightly toward him, brushing her hand against his arm. Talon did not flinch or pull away. Instead, he placed his hand gently over hers. The gesture, simple and unassuming, carried more meaning than words could capture: trust, care, and the promise of safety. "Why did you save me?" she asked, her voice barely audible, carrying a mix of curiosity and wonder. Talon's gaze softened. "Because no one should face terror alone. Because you deserve to be seen, protected, and safe." His voice was steady, unwavering, and in that steadiness, Lydia found a reassurance that touched something deep within her, a feeling she had long thought impossible: belonging. For the first time since the morning she fled, Lydia allowed herself to imagine a life that was not dictated by fear or control. A life where she could choose her path, speak her mind, and be seen for who she truly was. And in that imagined future, Talon was there not as a savior or a stranger, but as a companion, a protector, and perhaps even more. A partner whose presence made the world feel less dangerous and more vibrant. As the sky deepened into shades of crimson and violet, Lydia spoke, her words tentative but certain. "I've never had someone stand by me like this before, and I think I want to." Her eyes met his, wide with vulnerability and hope. Talon's response was quiet but unwavering. "Then I will stand by you, always. No one will harm you while I draw breath." The words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes, not from fear, but from relief and a newfound sense of peace. She had run, hidden, and fought, but now she could rest, not just in body, but in spirit. She had someone who would not only protect her, but respect her, honor her, and value her choice. The canyon, the waterfall, the desert sky, they had all witnessed the transformation. From a frightened bride running for her life, Lydia had become a woman who stood tall, whose voice mattered, whose courage had been tested and proven. And beside her, Talon's steady presence promised a future, where danger no longer dictated the terms of her life. They sat together in silence as the last rays of sun faded, the canyon wrapping around them like a protective embrace. For Lydia, there was no fear, no threat, no shadow of the life she had left behind, only the steady certainty that she was safe, and that this new beginning, uncertain though it might be, was hers to claim. And Talon, the warrior who had appeared when she had run in terror, remained at her side, unwavering, a living promise. "You will always be safe with me." In that moment, Lydia knew the truth she had long sought. She was free, she was seen, and she was home.